Audio made possible by www.jackettome.com. Audio Fanfiction Productions presents Wide Awake. Fanfiction written by Angskata003. Fanfiction inspired by the Twilight Saga written by Stephanie Meyer. Chapter 28. Coconut Confections.
Edward's point of view. Fucking silence. I shifted uncomfortably in my stiff leather seat, making my leather jacket squeak loudly against it as me and Carlyle scrutinized me from behind the desk inside his study with pursed lips. Bella shifted at the same time, freezing to glance at me from the seat at my side. She looked fucking uncomfortable too. She had obviously changed and showered after she got home. I was a little delayed, having to drop Jez off at his house before I could come home and be subjected to all of this fucking silence. And all I could hear in my head was the sounds of crickets chirping. Esme was sitting in Carlyle's desk chair, as he stood beside her, both glancing back and forth between me and my girl, as if we were some twisted fucking science experiment gone awry. I sighed quietly and turned my head to look at Bella again. She didn't have her hoodie on, instead clad in a large sweatshirt. I was guessing that it was being washed, or some shit. Fucking bloody. Her nose and eye were bruised, and slightly swollen as she bit her bottom lip at the scene in front of us. It was really quite ridiculous, the way they were just staring at us and making my girl uncomfortable. As if she needed any more of that shit. With a disgruntled eye roll, I reached over the space between us and took her hand from her lap, grasping it tightly as they hung between the two stiff leather chairs. She turned her head and smiled at me while I rubbed it with my thumb. I tried to convey all my love to her as I gazed back into her tired eyes intensely, trying to relax her stiff posture with my caress. She eased back into the seat, turning her head again to face the parental figures. And they were just fucking gaping at the space between our chairs. Like we had just stripped off all our clothes and began fucking on the desk in front of them rather than just holding hands. I didn't let go. I would have thought our closeness would have been pretty fucking obvious by then. Carlyle opened his mouth, piquing my attention, but then just closed it again, as he stared at our hands with a furrowed brow. I propped the elbow of my free arm on the arm of the chair, dropping my cheek into my palm, and tapping my head with my index finger. Esme was the first to finally speak.
How?
She trailed off as she stared at our hands. I didn't move from my position since I pretty fucking much anticipated the particular question she was attempting to ask. Ella sighed deeply beside me.
You want to know why he can't touch me?
She hedged in her awfully raspy voice that made me just fucking rub her hand with my thumb from her. That shit sounded painful. Esme nodded, finally breaking her gaze from our hands, to meet Bella's tired stare. My girl squeezed my hand back, so I shifted my head in my palm to look at her. She straightened up in her chair, lifting her chin up and rounding her shoulders back. All grown up. I thought smugly, fucking loving when she did that shit. She looked right into Esme's eyes as I gazed at her confident posture from my palm.
He's different,
she rasped, squeezing my hand and turning her face to gaze back into my eyes. And she looked so fucking proud of that fact as she gazed at me lovingly, not giving a shit that she had to tell them. And I just fucking smiled back at her, because I loved that I was different too. I shifted my head in my palm to look back at Esme. Her brows were furrowed as her gaze turned to me, scrutinizing me harder with her eyes, likely trying to find the difference. I decided to squash that line of thought quickly. I just am, I said, a little too sharply, as the thought of trying to explain the electricity made me internally cringe. That shit was private between my girl and I, and even if I wanted to explain it, I probably couldn't. She looked taken aback by my comment, and unsatisfied with the answer, but I resolved to keep that particular subject closed. I told her with my eyes that it wasn't a topic meant for further discussion. I hated to be a prick to her, but there were a lot of questions I couldn't answer, and many subjects that would not be touched upon. That was only one of them. Carlyle shifted beside her, gaining my attention, as he looked at me disapprovingly with a sigh. He cleared his throat. How long have you two been? He trailed off looking at us questioningly. Friends? Confidants? Sleeping partners? Almost lovers? I wasn't sure how to answer his quizzical gaze. There was no fucking way I was going to let them get suspicious of our sleeping arrangements, and I really didn't want to touch on the subject of our relationship either. Not until I could tell my girl that I loved her, and we figured it out for ourselves. And since we weren't the only couple in the room fucking hiding, I decided to use it. I smirked cockily at Daddy Z, from my seat, still lounging with my cheek in my palm, and holding my girl's hand. "We met at one time you went away on business," I reply smugly, fucking loving the way his eyes grew minutely wider at the mention. "Do you know," I shrugged casually, darting my eyes to Esme. "The both of you," I said in a meaningful tone. And then Esme fucking blushed, and darted her eyes away from mine to the desktop. I bit back a hearty snicker, seeing the similarities between her and my girl, as her face grew red. Then it was Carlisle's turn to shift uncomfortably. I took the window of opportunity. "Are we finished here?" I asked, finally removing my head from my palm, and sitting up in my seat. I had shit that I needed to attend to. "I'm sure Bella would like some time to relax," I added, turning my head to look at my girl, who was smiling back at sweetly. I rubbed her hand a little firmer, feeling the need to bring it to my lips and kiss it softly. Of course there was no fucking way I would. Not in front of them. That would bring up a question I couldn't answer yet. Carlisle's eyes grew wide.
"Oh yes, of course,"
he exclaimed, shifting his gaze to Belle's.
"Please forgive me for keeping you. I'm sure I can't continue this conversation with Edward alone."
He made a very fucking pointed glance at me that made me want to groan yet again. He wanted to do this shit now. Impatient bastard. And I could see in Esme's eyes, when she looked at my girl, that she was thinking the same thing. They were going to divide and conquer. And I couldn't allow them the opportunity to ask that question until I could talk to my girl. I sighed, and raked the fingers of my free hand through my hair. It'd be really fucking nice to have a moment alone with Bella first, I said, frustrated, emphasizing the word alone. He just wanted to usher her ass out the door, and ask me all the shit he didn't have the balls to ask in front of her. Esme glared a few daggers at me for some fucking reason after I asked from her seat behind the desk. Carlisle pursed his lips and glanced down at Esme with a quirked eyebrow. She looked thoughtful as she gazed at Bella questioningly. I almost fucking snorted when I realized she was asking my girl if it was okay to leave her alone with me. Bella nodded enthusiastically, clearly as impatient as I was to get some much-needed alone time. Esme nodded her head at Carlisle, and made to stand up and leave the study, but I stopped her. "We'll be outside," I informed them as I stood up from the stiff leather chair, bringing my girl with me. I didn't wait for any confirmation as I led her out of the study, and down the stairs. She followed beside me quietly while holding my hand. I led her out back to the gazebo. Because it was our neutral territory. Our very own middle ground. It was different in the day, when you could actually see the meadow and the river in perfect clarity. Once we were up on the platform, I turned to Bella and grabbed her by the waist, lifting her up to sit on the back side of the table facing the river and the sunset so that her face would be level with mine. She looked relieved for the privacy as I stood in between her legs and smoothed her damp hair away from her bruised face. The orange of the sunset behind the clouds colored her face in lively pink that